The number one reason your fly isn't working when you're fishing might surprise you. It's not the color of the fly. It's not the fact that it doesn't have flash on it or that the bead head is the wrong color. It actually is the size of the fly that matters the most. When you're fly fishing, the size is absolutely critical. And I'm specifically talking about fishing for trout. You know, when you're talking about bass fishing, you're actually trying to get the biggest fly that you can get in their mouths. But when you talk about trout fishing, your size is absolutely critical. This is more critical in lakes and in rivers than any other situation, because if the size of your fly isn't perfect, you just simply aren't going to catch fish. You're definitely not going to catch the bigger fish because they're going to be hugging the bottom and they're going to be very selective about what they eat. They got big for a reason, and if you're not fishing the right size fly, it's going to be very difficult for you to catch fish. So how do you tell what type of fly to use and what size of fly to use? A lot of times you're going to look underneath the rocks. I have enough experience fishing a lot of these rivers that I can just go to the river and I can know what size of fly to use. Typically, if you're fishing blue wing alls, you're going to be fishing size 22 and 20. Now I'm specifically talking about nymphs. Dry flies, you might be able to get away with an 18. If you're fishing PMDs, which is like my all-time favorite hatch, you're going to be looking at sizes 20, 18, and 16. 18 is a good middle of the road. 20 generally is going to be a better size for that type of mayfly. And caddis are usually just standard size 16. Just in general, they can be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, but in general, wet flies, nymphs, soft hackles, dry flies, size 16 is going to be the size of the caddis. Now, a caddis hatch is really interesting because those fish are actually just like exploding the surface and chasing. They're used to chasing with a little bit of movement those caddis, because the caddis, when they emerge, they're moving, they're trying to get out of their shucks, and they're actually making a wake in the water, and the fish are attracted to that, and they like a little bit of movement. But when you're fishing nymphs, specifically mayfly nymphs, you're going to want to dead drift those as deadly smooth as possible. And what I mean by that is there can be no movement of that fly, no micro drag, no major drag on the top from your line, or you pulling it, or you pulling the bobber back. You can't have any movement on that whatsoever. So the size of your fly is going to be absolutely critical. One of the easiest ways is to actually just pick up a rock and look underneath there and see exactly what they're eating. If you're seeing a mayfly, which is usually those are the ones with the tails on the end of them, if you're seeing mayfly nymphs, you can see exactly what size, shape, and color, and then just take a look in your fly box and try to match it exactly. You can even take the bug and actually go in your fly box and pick out the exact same one. This is a very, very useful technique that you can do pretty much anywhere. Just go into the rivers. The lakes are just a little bit harder because those flies are going to be on the very, very, very bottom. I know a lot of people will take lake trout and they'll pump their stomachs. I'm not a huge fan of this because you don't actually want to pump the stomach. It's very important that you pump the throat if you're going to do that. So a lot of people just jam it all the way down in the stomach. You don't need to do that. Just put it down in the throat and suck up. It'll suck up the stomach contents, and then you can put it on your hand and you can see what's working, what's not, what size of corominids are usually the number one thing that they're eating in lakes. And you're going to see that they're actually pretty small. The size of bug that they're eating on these hatch situations are actually going to be a lot smaller than you think. Just use a fly that is that size or smaller. If you don't know which size to use, always go smaller. In my experience, just a smaller is always better. A lot of the tailwater fisheries that I'm fishing, people aren't catching fish, and I can tell that they're not going to catch any fish because the fly, I can guarantee, is just kind of that stock fly that they got from the big sporting goods shop or some fly shop where they just gave them a general bead head pheasant tail, size 16 nymph. Could that work? Yes. Are they going to catch fish with that? Maybe. Most likely one or two fish, but you aren't just going to be in a situation where you can have 100% confidence that a good drift is going to have a fish on the first cast, the very first cast, unless you're fishing, let's say, a size 20 or 22 bead head. By the way, bead heads always outfish the non-bead headed patterns. I don't know why that is. I don't know whether it gets them to the bottom or just gives a little flash. I think it just gives them, the fish, a little bit of indication that there's something there because they're just sitting in one lane. And if you're just off by an inch, I think it gets that fish to move over a little bit just because it gives a little bit of flash. But the theory on why bead heads work more and better and you catch more fish with them than the non-bead head ones, I have no idea, but I just tend to do so much better with them. So all my nymphs have bead heads. I have the amount of nymphs that I have that don't have bead heads on them, it's very, very, very small. The other thing is when you're looking at fishing small flies, the smaller you get in your fly, and this is why I like tying my own flies, is because you can actually customize this over and over and over, but the smaller you get in your fly size, the less complicated it has to be. You're fishing like a size 22, you have a bead head, you could literally just take thread and make a fly out of thread. Put a little tail on it, put thread on it, put a little bit of epoxy over the top of it, and bam, you've got a really, really nice, you've basically got a thread fly. So these don't have to be fancy, but as you get bigger and bigger, let's say size 12, 14, let's say a size 10 fly, it's going to be, you need to be a little bit more specific on that one. You need to have a little bit more maybe flash on it, a little bit, those tails, everything has to be more proportional. So the smaller flies, actually you can get away with simpler flies. What I used to do is I used to go to a river and take something like a beadhead pheasant tail, let's say a size 20 fly that I knew worked. I would bring that home and I would tie up everything except for the flash, and I would see if that worked. And then I would actually take that fly in. Over the years, I'd make it more simple and more simple and more simple. And basically what I got down to, my number one fly, my super secret fly that I use, it is super effective on tailwaters for blueing olives, PMDs, basically any mayfly, is just a thread fly. It is a thread tail, thread fly, tiny bit of dubbing, bead head, and you're done. I can literally make this fly in about 30 seconds to a minute. And if I have all my stuff all pre-tied up, like I have my beads already on my flies, I have my beads on my hook, excuse me, I can actually just tie those up just within 30 seconds, just 1, 2, 3. I can tie these up by the dozen within 10 minutes. So it's really cool. And I usually tie them up in just 2 colors. I tie them up in a brown and a light gray. That's pretty much all you need, because when you get that small, the fish don't really care about the color. They're just more or less looking at the size. So, you know, you're also, look, the color variance doesn't really matter as you get to the smaller size of flies. So don't be so worried and don't be so particular about, do I have the right color? You know, if you're fishing a size 22, you're lucky if they even see that thing. And that's why I think that bead head tends to work much better than the non-bead head nymph flies. Now, when you're getting into the bigger sizes, you could probably get a little bit more particular with the colors of those. But generally, all my flies, if you just did like, dry flies especially, you're just doing like a pale color and then a dark color. So brown and then a PMD color, because I love fishing the PMD hatch. So the dry flies and PMDs, I have just a whole selection of those. And then basically brown drakes, green drakes, blueing alls, you can just use like a dark brown color. So, and that is my number one tip on if you aren't catching anything. The number one reason, just in my opinion, why you aren't catching anything is just your fly is too big, and that's a very common scenario. If you aren't catching anything in 10 minutes, just switch it up. And that's another thing that I would just kind of a side note here, switch things up. Fly fishing is about eliminating variables. If you want to go out and you wanted to fly fish in a certain situation, you didn't know what fly to use, just go out there and start fishing. If in 15 minutes you don't get anything and you've worked that water really good, fix something and change something so that you're not doing the same thing over and over and over. I see too many people just take one fly and fish in one spot for hours. I've seen dudes sit in the same spot and I don't even see them catching any fish. They're sitting in the same spot for like 8 hours. Get out, stretch your legs, fish different water, fish different situations, and you're gonna catch way more fish because different fish are seeing different flies. And once you figure out what fly to use, then the next day that you're fishing is just gonna be that much easier. Do a variation. So if you had a size 20 bead head pheasant tail fly, start fishing a 20 and a 22 at varying depths and varying weights with the different lengths of your bobber and your leader and tippet. Now your variables are cut down. So the more days in a row that you fish, the better you're going to be and the more fish you're gonna catch in subsequent days. A lot of times those hatches are the same time every single day. And so you can really target them based on that. So anyways, I ramble on a little bit. I hope you guys like this, to watch this video. If you have any other videos you would like me to make about other fishing situations, just let me know in the comments, because I do read these comments and I do make these videos for you. So anything that you want to learn from, I'm glad to make a video about it. Thank you for watching.